Good afternoon. You all well? My name is Simon Mitchell. I'm the training manager for a company called Spanset, and we are members of WAHSA. WAHSA is a group of organisations like ourselves. We were set up back in 2005, and we represent the UK manufacturing industry within for personal fall protection equipment. It's made up of a number of members: Abtech, Capital Safety Group, High-Tech, Latchways, P&P, SafeSite, ourselves, Spanset, Tractel and Transweb. If I've missed anyone out, I do apologise, but we always have new members joining. We're going to spend some time today talking about work restraint systems and effectively what items of equipment we can use to build these systems of safety up. So in the first instance, we're going to have this question: what is a work restraint system? Well, put quite simply, it's the use of personal fall protective equipment to stop somebody reaching a fall hazard. Where does it fit into the hierarchy of measures that we have within the the work at height regulations? Well, we always get this classic sort of terminology where, first of all, where possible, we try to avoid a fall, then sort of prevent falls and mitigate the consequences. So building up on these principles, we avoid sort of work at height wherever possible. Probably the best example of this: for many years I trained window cleaners to climb up either enormous sets of ladders or abseil off the top of buildings to clean windows in elevated positions. We rarely get involved in these tasks in this day and age. What these people tend to employ, which I'm sure most of you have seen at some point, are these tall telescopic poles with a brush on the top of it. The guy stood next to a van full of deionised water. It's pumped to the brush head, and the guy's effectively stood at pavement level, avoiding any work at height. Unfortunately, it's not always possible to do your job with a big stick, so in some cases we've actually got to get physically involved with the issues of working at height. So then we try to prevent the fall by using collective measures such as barriers, other types of edge protection, working from a completed scaffold or using a mobile elevator work platform. If we can't use these collective forms of protection, we move on to personal forms, i.e. work restraint. So physically sticking somebody in a harness of some description, attaching them to a suitable anchorage point, but using a piece of equipment that prevents that person reaching the fall hazard. Then last but not least, we mitigate the consequences of a fall via the use of collective forms of equipment such as safety nets, soft landing systems, airbags that we can surround vehicles when operatives are offloading these items of equipment. And then last but not least, the final resort, we use pieces of equipment that are personal to mitigate the consequences of the fall, i.e. fall arrest equipment. So again, equipping somebody with a harness, attaching them to a suitable anchorage point, using a lanyard or a fall arrest block of some description, but we physically let that person fall quite a considerable distance in some circumstances, but use the energy absorbing element to reduce the potential impact forces on the body down to survivable levels. So you can see from those first short series of slides we went through, work restraint sits quite high up the hierarchy of measures, and it's definitely something we should be looking at before getting to these more higher risk activities. So why do we use work restraint? Well, in the first instance, you don't fall off, and falling off things is not a very pleasant experience by any means. If you don't fall off, you're not going to get injured. In addition, if you don't fall off, you don't need to be rescued. We don't need to consider how we're going to retrieve somebody who's hanging off the side of this structure in their full body harness. When I say we don't need to consider rescue, we always need to consider how we may have to evacuate the operative from that particular structure if they become ill. If it's been quite difficult to gain access to this area, we need to consider how we're going to retrieve these people from these situations. So what do we use to build up a work restraint system? Oh. There we go. Quite a simple setup. Got one of my colleagues on one of our training structures at Spanset. He's wearing a harness that encapsulates the user. He's got a lanyard which is going to connect him to his anchorage point. Then he's got wrapped around a suitable bit of structure behind him, a sling as his anchorage. Similar sort of setup, but using a slightly different piece of equipment. We have again the harness that's encapsulating the user. In this case, rather than a lanyard, he's using an adjustable safety line system. The reason being, it's impossible for us as a manufacturer to make a lanyard more than 2 meters long. The EN standards prohibit it. So if we want to work more than 2 meters from any anchorage while still restraining ourselves, we can't use 2 lanyards clipped together to create a 4 meter one. We have to employ these pieces of equipment, which we'll have a look at later on. But again, it's got suitable anchorage stuck in the concrete, and he's using it in such a manner that he can't reach the fall hazard. Probably the most common example of restraint systems in use in reality is the use of personal fall protection equipment to stop people leaving things like our boom-mounted elevator work platforms. Again, similar sort of setup. We've got our user in his full body harness attached with an adjustable lanyard to the anchorage point within inside the elevator work platform. And this is the issue. This is what always makes me laugh, really. At the end of the day, there is actually no such thing as a work restraint lanyard. We don't have them. We have lanyards, and we have energy-absorbing lanyards. What I've got here, it's a bit difficult to make out, but I've got a very concise list of some of the most common standards we use for testing and certifying items of personal fall protection equipment. Sat at the top is EN361. It's the standard for a fall arrest harness, a full body harness. Underneath it, EN362 are the standard for connectors, these sort of devices. EN795 is our standard for fall arrest anchorages. Sorry. EN354 is the standard for a lanyard. So I've got a lanyard, EN354. Doesn't feature an energy absorber, but it's not a restraint lanyard. It's not called a restraint lanyard. This is somewhat a problem that we've created as manufacturers. We refer to them as restraint lanyards, but in reality it's just a lanyard that doesn't feature an energy absorber. Further down the list we've got EN355. That is the standard for an energy absorbing element. So if I take one of these and integrate into it an energy absorber, it complies to EN355. Further down the list, I've got EN360, fall arrest blocks, retractable devices, SRLs, whatever people want to call them. Then slap down at the bottom, possibly one of the most applicable is EN358, which is the standard for work positioning devices. And it also states there, you see that tentative word, belts and work positioning and restraint. It doesn't mention in any of those titles a work restraint lanyard. So, first of all, can you use a lanyard for restraint, a standard non-shock absorbing lanyard? The answer being, yes you can, providing it stops you reaching the fall hazard. If you can reach the fall hazard, then we've got a bit of an issue on our hands. So, using one of these to perform the task in question, happily do so, but the length is the critical issue to the task. Can I use a lanyard that features an energy absorber as part of a work restraint system? The answer, again, quite simply, is yes, we can, providing it stops the user reaching the fall hazard. Now, this is where we get massive misconceptions from users, and people have to enforce these rules on site. On many occasions, people are being prevented from working when their method statement says they use a work restraint system, but they're seen using a fall arrest lanyard. Now, the dynamics behind lanyards, to actually start the energy absorber deploying, we have to place a force in excess of 2 kilonewtons of dynamic energy into it. I'm pretty sure there's no one alive on this planet that could actually attach this to a suitable anchorage, attach it to their harness and force it open by pulling on it. It's just not going to happen. So providing this piece of equipment is adjusted to stop the user reaching the edge, it's a restraint system, simple as. Can I use a work position line or a work position lanyard again as part of my work restraint system? So we have a work position line, connector that can be attached to our suitable anchorage, an adjustment device by which if we depress a button on it we can alter the position along the length of the line. In terms of standards, I can make this as long as you need it. It could be 10, 20, 30 metres long. But the answer again is yes, we can use these for restraint provided it's adjusted and used in such a manner that it stops a person reaching a fall hazard. Probably then the most controversial one. Can we use a fall arrest block for restraint? Answer again is yes, providing it stops the user reaching the fall hazard. And by that I mean this device itself is 3.5 metres long. If by the time the person has pulled out the full length of this lanyard, 3.5 metres, and has not managed to get involved with a fall hazard, it's working as a suitable restraint. However, there is this big misconception that these devices, because of the mechanics inside them, somebody sort of trips towards the edge, will lock off. It is a total myth. The only circumstance that we can obviously use these in reality for restraint, as we've stated already, is if it's fully deployed and it's fully paid out. So, in conclusion, as such, work restraint systems, they've got to prevent the user reaching the fall hazard. If it's doing that, it's working appropriately. Beyond that, if anyone can fall on these items of equipment, it's no longer a work restraint system, it is a fall arrest system. It's quite a simple message. So, rather brief, but such we are sort of struggling for time this morning. Does anyone have any questions in any of the things we've raised, or have it caused any confusion as such?
Where can we find this information? Will it be given out by yourselves?
If you go onto the WAHSA website or speak to our representative who's sat out at the front there, I'm sure they can provide you our guidance sheet that talks about the correct selection and use of personal fall protection equipment.
But as you say, it's a big learning curve for them on site to learn that this fall arrest can be used as a fall restraint.
So like we say, at the end of the day, there's really no such, in technical terms, there's no such thing as a fall arrest lanyard. There's a lanyard that features an energy absorber. Because it features an energy absorber, I can use it in the event of a fall. But we need to be clear, if the lanyard doesn't feature an energy absorber, it can't be used as part of a fall arrest system. And that's what really the message that perhaps I'm trying to get across. All these things we talk about, work restraint, work position and fall arrest, it's nothing to do with equipment, it's how it's used at the end of the day as to what type of system we sort of build with these items of equipment.
Yeah, I just think, as you said earlier, the terminology is misconstrued and misunderstood people and caused confusion.
Indeed, like last week I only spent 2 hours speaking to our health and safety advisor on site, trying to get him to understand that these operatives could use a fall arrest lanyard when working inside the, a mobile elevator work platform. Such it comes down to education really at the end of the day, and hopefully through these sort of mechanisms we can get these messages across.
And that 200 kilograms is standard for all fall arrests, is it?
Yeah, the standard states it must not deploy above 2 kilonewtons. If memory serves me correctly, our lanyards won't actually deploy till around 303 kilonewtons. So as such, there's no chance anyone's going to deploy these things just by sort of subjecting them to their body mass, their body weight. Any other questions? Well, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. Cheers.
Asked Simon a question. Was his answer sufficient for your needs?
It was indeed, because so much confusion is on site where people will see a fall arrest being used as a fall restraint and they say that's a no-no. We've just been told it's perfectly all right.
Okay, thank you.